Hello and welcome to the Global Business Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Philpott. Thank you for joining me again today. It's great to be back with the Global Business Podcast. And on the show, I talk to business leaders all across the world, from multinational company leaders to not-for-profit leaders to startup entrepreneurs. They're all within our scope. And we hope to educate, motivate, inspire you in your business dealings at the moment. In these difficult times, we're coming out of COVID-19, and what is the new business landscape going to look like? Today, we're talking airlines. What is the airline industry doing to get us all back flying? How are governments supporting that? And what's happening to all the people employed by those airlines? My guest today is going to bring us up to date with all of that information. So why don't we go over now and meet my guest for today? So it's a very warm welcome to the Global Business Podcast show to Mr. Mark Martin. Mate, how are you today?
Mark, thanks for having me today. Great to be here. I'm well, thank you, and I hope everybody's staying safe.
Yeah, that's the main thing, isn't it? Now, whereabouts in the world are you having a chat to us from today?
I'm on this podcast with you from extremely hot and sunny India at the moment.
Which part of India are you in?
I'm over in New Delhi, Mark.
New Delhi, what a fantastic city it is, and I guess it is. It's that very hot time of the year over there, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. It's about 44 degrees, and with a humidity of roughly 68 to 75%. So it is it's as insane as India can get.
Well, let's take your mind off that for a few minutes while we chat about the airline industry, and both you and I share a passion about the industry. Now, whenever I talk to anybody, I say my main man to talk to about the aviation industry is Mark Martin, and you've been in the industry a long time. What business are you doing in the industry these days, Mark?
Martin Consulting was started in 2013. We're predominantly an aviation safety firm. We work with organizations to improve their safety matrix, safety index, try and plug all the holes where they're exposed with any sort of a risk. We also do investigation and forensic investigation of accidents, incidents, snags, and so on. On the consulting side, we're quite strong with strategic advisory that's more towards business jets, helicopters, airports, as well as core airline business, which is the MRO and the flight operation side. So collectively, we're more or less a exclusive aviation consulting firm. We don't do any other work apart from wherever there's an aviation link, and that also does include cargo and air freight and logistics, more on the air freight side.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that's why you're my go-to guy when it comes to everything aviation. And today we're going to have a good old chat about the state of the airline industry, because there's a lot of people out there that want to know, a little bit closer to the facts than maybe what we're seeing on the mainstream media about what's happening with the airlines. When are we all going to be able to fly across the world and all the rest of it? But I want to start off by asking you today, have you ever seen anything like this as far as the airline industry's welfare goes since you've been attached to the aviation industry, of what we're going through now?
I think, Mark, what we have seen is elements of where we are at the moment, but not precisely what we're going through or living at the moment. The 2008-9 financial crisis was equally impacting for the airline business globally, because during that time it was airlines that were flying empty seats because there were no takers for air travel. Today it's the reverse. At the moment we're dealing with a situation where airlines are forced not to travel as a result of the pandemic, and to lower the spread of COVID-19. So although it's very similar in nature, the effective impact on airlines is more catastrophic at the moment, because if you're not going to fly, although you do save on your single largest expense, which is fuel, but guess what? Your fixed expenses are still going to mount up and you need to pay for it. So it clearly is a very complicated moment at the moment. But I'd probably say that the industry has seen worse. 9/11 completely realigned the traditional airline model and forced everybody to look at a low cost model, and that seemed to work because that's how they survived.
Mm.
So we're dealing with a very interesting shakeup, for want of a better word, and I think the shakeup will have its benefits. It's only when we should know about that when at least we contain the spread of COVID-19 with an effective vaccine, which I'm hoping happens in the next 12 to 18 months. And possibly by then, gradually life does come back to some level of normalcy.
Yeah, a lot of people sitting at home today thinking about when are they going to be able to take that overseas holiday again. There's a lot of business people, of course, not only listening into the show today, but also having that question, when are they going to be able to fly across the world again safely? I guess one of the other questions I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the challenges or the greatest challenges that the airlines have as we start to slowly come out of the lockdown in terms of starting up their global fleets again? What are some of their primary concerns as we get going again?
You're rightly summed up by you, Mark. The litmus test and an indicator when everything's back to normal should be when folks out there can pack their bags and take a holiday. That is when we know that the business is back on track and it's looking good. Challenges at the moment, I think most airlines, airports, any organization that's involved in the aviation or the airline business directly is dealing with how best can they secure and safeguard themselves from having the virus pretty much get into their organization, their people, their airline system, or their transportation system, and wreak havoc. A lot of focus at the moment is being made to secure organizations, its people, pilots, flight attendants, cabin crew, cargo loaders, baggage handlers, airport staff, and so on. And while we're still dealing with this in some sense of a nascency, because we really don't know, we haven't figured out the bottom of COVID-19 yet. There are interesting steps that have been taken by global regulators. For example, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, has just released the document 10144, which helps create a sustainable safety risk program, which seems to work fairly well. And large organizations like DHL out of Leipzig, especially for their Boeing 767 and the larger freighter organizations, have already begun adapting to the new regulations because it's a very interesting direction that one can take to do whatever you can to secure yourself. Um, on the flip side, I think the bigger concern right now is to try and not let that virus use us as a carrier, and by means of that, propagate it into new markets, into new territories and regions. And it's the same logic that we took for diseases like tuberculosis at one time. I mean, the bug could be out there, as long as it doesn't affect us and we don't spread it, we should be fine. And I think that's the whole logic of where we're coming up with COVID-19. COVID-19 will be around. The bug will evolve. It will see different avatars of its own. But as long as we don't contract it and we don't spread it, we should be fine. Are we going to?
No, sorry, I was just going to ask you in relation to, the airlines putting their own programs together to come out of this. Have you come across any airlines at the moment that are kind of the leading stars when it comes to the preparation for getting all the things into place that are going to be required to make sure that people can fly around the world safely again? Is there any other carriers that have kind of leapfrogged everybody else and gone running with this?
Interesting that you mentioned it, Mark. It's just been about 6 months to us trying to get our arms around the COVID-19, impact. So a lot of the airlines have taken steps that have been directed by the WHO. So the WHO has laid down certain recommendations, and regions have adapted that to their own way of working and so on. But collectively, there really hasn't been anything holistic from an aviation um, vertical implementation program. And but now we do have that with the ICAO Doc 10144. Now everybody now have some sense of a direction, and it's going to work quite well, Mark. I do foresee that, what you've just mentioned about having a good effective program in place with airlines, and the steps an airline would take to gear themselves up. I think that's something which will happen now, and we are looking at the next 30 or 60 days to have a good, sound COVID 19 risk protection program in place.
Is something like geography going to play a big role in the success or failure of airlines going forward? And I raise that because if we look at a country like New Zealand, which yesterday just announced that they're completely COVID free, and they have an airline in Air New Zealand that literally can't fly anywhere else in the world at the moment, because whilst New Zealand might be COVID free, other countries where their destinations are typically are not COVID free, and therefore that creates a systemic problem, I guess, within Air New Zealand's ability to fly international routes. So do you see geography going forward as being a pivotal part of the success or failure of some of the airlines?
Absolutely, Mark, and not just geography. I think you've touched on a very interesting point here. It's how the region has a very high sense of maturity, and where the people itself are responsible. The governments are more proactive with taking the right steps. It's a collective. It's a domino effect. Everybody needs to take steps into ensure that COVID doesn't spread, and it's contained. And New Zealand has done an outstanding job over the last, 60 days of what we're seeing with their actions and handling it. I think a very similar parallel that we can draw at the moment, especially with the extremely, populous region, is China. When China initially detected COVID last year in November, and by the time we came over to April and May, China had already contained it, and they started flights within China, as well as flights coming in from Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. So it's when the government and when the people are responsible and the confidence is built strong enough that they can allow an influx of passengers or travelers, or whoever it is that enters their borders. That's when we know that the system they have works, it's robust, it's in place, and it's reliable.
Let's talk about government involvement, because as we know, a lot of governments around the world have stood up and stepped in, you could say, to support the ongoing sustainability of some of their carriers. And I just read the other day that the US flight attendants have called for the US government to continue funding through till the end of the year to support that industry. Is that something that you're in favour of? Do you think the government should be stepping up and supporting the airlines during these difficult times?
Up to a point, yes. I think airlines do need some level of government support, and for I think more some sense of a government assurance that they're not going to let them down or force them into bankruptcy. So I think that is very, very important. But at the same time, the responsibility does shift to the airline, because they need to take a grip of their own situation, come up with their own game plan, and get going and get moving with something that works best for them, because the government can't keep supporting airlines with taxpayer money, and at some point that avenue is going to be shut and closed down for airlines. So from a broader perspective, this is what I've been really pushing a lot. I think while we all have, for most industries, sort of a business continuity insurance plan, why don't we create a global fund where airlines contribute, something as ridiculously low as $100 million a year, where you can get a bailout support, and when the chips are down, for about $5 to $10 billion as an insurance backup. So I do believe we need to evolve our mindset. We need to kind of really step up to the next level when with the way we look at our airlines, because we have to consider one fact, and that aviation and airlines is an imperative necessity. It is air transport. It's infrastructure, and we need to start looking at it like infrastructure, Mark.
It's interesting to see some of the senior executive decisions that are going on around the world at the moment. I want to highlight one to you that I've read about, which is Patrick Healy, who's the chairman of Cathay Pacific. He's basically said that nothing's off the table at the moment when it comes to making the tough decisions and what he calls right-sizing efforts of Cathay Pacific over the coming months. Do you think this is going to be a great opportunity, like you mentioned before when 9/11 came along, for the whole industry to re-engineer itself and come up with new solutions and innovations?
Honestly, Mark, I don't think taking a scissor and cutting up your organization just because you're dealing with, cash flow challenges and pressures makes strategic sense. Because tomorrow, when the business does look up, where are you going to get those people from, and what are you going to do with the residual fleet you have? It's not just Cathay Pacific. Emirates has announced a widespread layoffs. They're reducing their capacity, their organization by nearly 35%. Everyone's taking these radical steps to cut back. But I think what one really needs to do now is more than cut back and shrink your organization. I think you need to optimize your organization, because complacency does set in when you're too happy in your comfort zone, and when everything is going fine and dandy, and suddenly out of nowhere you get shaken up and you start pretty much destroying yourself. I think that's not the way it should be done. Cost optimization works great if you innovate your costs and not chop an arm and a leg off. So I believe that airlines need to be a bit more smart. What's happening at the moment, Mark, is everyone's panicking out there, and nothing seems to stop that panic, because the government isn't really, extending any sense of support or surety. They're pretty much leaving them out to fend for themselves, and most airlines at the moment are not run by airline people, but by bean counters. And that's what's really pushing everybody in a spot out there at the moment. And I hope better sense prevails, and they look at the bigger picture and start seeing a more logic reality to where and how do they need to get out of this mess.
Many of the airlines are working within a unionized environment, and I saw yesterday that there's been a new labour agreement that's come on board with Lauda Air in Austria, which I thought was quite fascinating, because they had just recently announced that they were going to close their hub in Vienna as a result of this whole pandemic, and they're now going to reopen the hub again because of this new labour agreement. Do you think this is going to be an opportunity for all parties to sit down around the table and talk about new labour agreements when it comes to all the different players within the industry?
Absolutely, Mark, and more certainly, I think that employees, whether they're engineers or flight attendants, your airport staff, pilots, and everyone that drives your organization, they're not a pressure group. They are to be taken in as partners. And when you start taking them as partners and share equal responsibility of your airline's revenue on their shoulders, you are going to get yourself a very good trade deal. And that's something which works very well. We have seen that happen in the past. If you remember United Airlines, in 1996-97, when they were forced, or they pushed themselves into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, they sold 40% of their airline to all employees. So employees were no longer employees; they were shareholders in the airline. So everyone worked hard and helped get United Airlines back on their feet, and what followed was three outstanding financial years for United Airlines. So if the more you involve your people, and the more you put the responsibility of the airline's longevity and their own future on their shoulders and their direct efforts and output, you're going to see tremendous success. United Airlines is one of the finest examples of what you just mentioned with Lauda Air. And I think where Lauda Air comes from is Niki Lauda, its promoter, has always been of the opinion to engage its people as part of their core organization, including the financial decision making. Emirates Airline employees, United Airlines employees had to forfeit 1 year's salary for ESOPs. And when they realized those ESOPs gave them 5 times or 6 times more their annual salary, that's when they started to really chip in and make things happen. So, absolutely yes, Mark. I think that is the way to go, and I think Nikki Lauda and Lauda Air are showing some sense of a direction to everybody in the industry to follow. Now, let's just hope the industry takes that cue and does something with it.
Let's talk about the impact of what's going on to us, the travellers, for a minute, because I look at something like Alaska Airlines at the moment, $600 million worth of credits to its customers on frequent flyer programs and everything else. What's the future of this type of model for the airlines, do you think, as we come out of this?
It's going to get worse, Mark. On a flip side, we're looking at frequent flyer miles and credits, but guess what? There are airlines who have accepted bookings, kept the money, put the money into their operating costs, and have no money to refund back passengers for the tickets they booked because they canceled all flights. So I think the part of complacency is this is precisely where it hits you, because we've been kind of going with this, business as usual, status quo, die cast way of working for the last 5 years, and living in a fool's paradise of pretending that nothing's ever going to happen to me, and at the most we're going to deal with currency or fuel risk. But hey, guess what? Every 10 years, something does happen to the aviation industry, and it does affect it in a profound manner. We've seen this in history. 96, 97 Asian economic crisis, 2000, September 11, when global terror attacked airlines, 2007, 8, 9, the world financial crisis. So I think in that, if we're smart enough, we should be able to help predict the unexpected. Pandemics have happened before. We've seen SARS, MERS, Ebola outbreak, and so on. And I think it's high time airlines developed a strong risk team to to put their minds and try to figure out what's going to happen next and how do we deal with the next major catastrophe that might affect air travel as we know it.
Let's talk about some of the physical aspects of what it's going to be like when we all start flying seriously again, in terms of how's the aircraft configuration going to change? Like, are we still going to have the class system that we know today, first, business, premier, economy, etc., or is that going to have to change?
I do believe that cabin formats will have to be maintained, because if you change the cabin format, Mark, you're looking at quite a significant cash spend from airlines. You're going to have to buy new seats and protective shields around seats so that you don't spread the virus to anybody. You're going to look at you know redoing your entire air conditioning recirculating system, install the new filters in there, change the fabric so the fabric doesn't absorb any COVID virus element. So it is going to be complicated, but I do believe as long as we can take all steps to ensure that whoever boards my aircraft has conformed with as much as what we know, which is from WHO or ICAO's document 10144, and that person is protected himself, his passenger is taken care of at least from his own sense of protection and whatever he has on, and the airline protects itself by the provisions that it has and the ability of it to take care of itself from a risk standpoint. I think this should go quite well, and we really don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to how we look at your first business class, economy first, and coach, way of travel. I think that should be maintained intact, and it should work at least for the moment.
Okay. Do airlines with certain types of aircraft, are they going to fare better or worse as we come out of this? So I'm thinking, obviously, there's a lot of airlines that have got new and modern fleets of technology flying today. Are they going to be advantaged because of some of the new restrictions?
Collectively, most airlines have a very common air conditioning pack system. I mean, the system really hasn't evolved much from its inception and implementation back in the late 70s and 80s. What we have added on is things like HEPA filters and a more fresh way of recirculating ambient air with air which is being circulated inside the cabin. But having said that, I do believe that the chances of any bug, not just COVID-19, but even the common flu or we are exposing ourselves to a higher level of risk when we have flights which are 5 hours or 10 hours or 15 hours. So I would like to think that some point short flights and short intervals with a standard aircraft configuration, the same equipment when it was off the production line, I think everybody out there does stand a lower chance of contracting any bug, not just COVID-19. But I think on the longer flights, which are 11, 12 hours, the chances of picking up something is much, much higher because, let's face it, you are in a contained space with 250 people, and the chance of you picking up something is much, much higher.
Yeah.
So I think equipment out there is fairly reliable, fairly safe, fairly compliant. A lot of nearly every airline mark has to comply with service bulletins and airworthiness directives that keep getting issued from time to time, which are almost 3 to 4 times a year. So
What if I'm, running an airline and I've got a fleet of 787s and A350s and the more younger generation of aircraft? Am I going to be in a position of strength versus those that have got older fleets? Are my new aircraft going to perform better for me in this new environment?
except for you're buying into new technology which kind of gives you a stronger cabin pressurization and a cabin altitude level of 6,000 feet as opposed to 11, 12,000 feet on a traditional 777 or a 747 or an Airbus A330. um, the effective impact is more or less going to be the same, Mark. It's just about how long are we in that aircraft and how and the longer period of time of us constantly breathing that same air that's being recirculated and brought back into the the aircraft air conditioning system. So that's where it becomes a little more critical. And I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks that Airbus, Boeing, Embraer, ATR, Bombardier, all the airframers come up with a service bulletin that helps airlines either adapt to a new product or do something to improve efficiency of their air conditioning pack system and the recirculating air system.
Yeah, great. Now, when we talk about what happened after 9/11, we're all aware that the way that we prepare to get onto an aircraft through departure lounges with increased security, it changed the way that we traveled. Are we going to see the similar kind of thing now with departure times being extended even further because of new procedures that we're going to have to go in before we board the aircraft? Do you think that's going to happen?
Oh, certainly. 9/11 not just changed the way we looked at airport security, but also completely altered how airline risk was looked at, and insurance companies spiked up premiums because it was never, no way did we ever know that terrorism would have such a profound impact on the airline business. What I do see coming up now, Mark, is what we once called the APHO, or the Airport Health Office, under the ICAO. The guys who give us those little yellow booklets with our yellow fever injection inoculation stamps, or where we need to show that as part of immigration. I think that's going to evolve to a disease control portal where, apart from going through immigration, security, your frisking, you'll have to pass a disease control portal where one would actually have to disclose every single disease you've ever had, your vital statistics, and God forbid, imagine the situation, imagine the moment where you need to take a blood test to show the results before you travel. So I think
Mm.
I do foresee some levels of safeguard very similar to those come into play. It is going to be travel no longer is going to be a pleasant experience. That's something I can tell you. It's going to be an insane ordeal for everybody, and it's not going to be it's not going to be pleasant, or it's not going to be fun like it used to be. And that's something which is we just have to deal with it. We have nothing. We really can't do much.
Now, I watched with great interest, like many millions of people did around the world the other day, when Elon Musk's SpaceX Demo 2 flight docked with the International Space Station, and there's so many superlatives to say about the technology that was used there and the ability to basically for that to be autonomous. We've still got a situation here on Earth where we've got people up the front flying these aircraft. Now, I would imagine that the whole pilot pipeline is going to be incredibly impacted by this COVID-19 experience, because a lot of pilots have been put in furlough for so long. What's your take on how this is going to impact the pilot market around the world?
I think what SpaceX has done with the Crew Dragon and Falcon 9 booster rocket is just phenomenal. But that works, autonomous space travel works brilliant when you have just one Crew Dragon spacecraft entering space from Earth. We have over 65,000 flights a day, and when you have that much of traffic out up there in the skies, and one aircraft entering another airspace, and airplanes crisscrossing each other, it does need to have some level of adult supervision. Now, when I say the word adult supervision, sure, that can be automated and that can be autonomous, but I think given the fact that there's a tremendous amount of human input still depending on what we call our conventional terrestrial air travel, I don't think we can actually bring the celestial travel into terrestrial unless we start implanting chips in most pilots' brains, and get them to start processing complex algorithms when they fly. So it is going to be very interesting. It's a wait and watch, but I think a lot of the aircraft out there are now coming up with newer ways of handling complex flight scenarios. So it's all, and pilots are no longer physically hand flying the plane, they're more as oversight managers. So we're kind of getting there, but we're not ready to be not ready to assume the SpaceX autonomous celestial travel platform at the moment. That's not going to happen. I do see it happening in 10 years, but not anytime soon.
So the second part, I guess, of that question was related to, we've got a lot of pilots sitting on the ground at the moment. They're not getting their hours up. They're having to be retrained and all the rest of it. This is putting a whole different complex on the situation. So is this going to create a bigger stop hold, I guess, on the pilot programs going forward? Are going to be less pilots going to be recruited as a result of less airlines flying, less aircraft flying, etc.?
It's very unfortunate that pilots are on ground at the moment, but I do see that as momentary. There will always be a need for pilots, Mark. I mean, year on year, we are retiring almost 30% of the global pilot workforce. So we do need to replace that retirement gap. We need to fill that retirement gap. At the same time, I do see the airline business evolve. Post-COVID recovery, airline scenario would be completely different to what we know it as we have at the moment. The same thing happened in 9/11. Same thing happened in the 8/9 financial crisis. So let's face it, folks out there need to travel, whether it's for work or whether it's to be with their friends and families or explore new destinations, or just get out there and be happy wanderers. That certainly is going to stay, and we're not going to start taking a ship or hopping on a boat to to travel from one place to the other. Well, except you, because you live on a boat, and that's the gorgeous thing in the world.
I was going to say that's my preferred option of travel, actually.
Yeah, you're the luckiest guy at the moment, Mark. But from a broader perspective, what you call mass travel is going to run on aviation. It's also air travel is also one of the safest ways to take up long distance travel at the moment, and it's worked extremely well in the past, and it will work in the near future. We just need to secure it to make it safe enough. That's it.
Absolutely. Now, everybody's dying for me to ask you this question. Are we going to be paying a lot more to be flying in the future? Are prices going to go up significantly?
If we're gonna force social distancing on board an aircraft, then the cost of our ticket might go up by nearly 4 times, because an airline isn't gonna subsidize an empty seat, and neither is the government with our taxpayer money. So for the moment, and when I say momentary, I'd probably reckon that to be over the next 6 months, that there might be a chance that we may have to pay a bit more. Uh, but I
4 times, you said. That's a significant amount more than
right.
a little bit more.
Right. So right. I mean, it is dramatically higher than what we'd pay that what we're paying at the moment. But I see that eventually come down when effective steps are taken to eradicate or prevent COVID from spreading. I think the cost of tickets will come down, and we also are dealing with a brilliant trend that we have in the airline business, which is called competition. And one airline will want to compete with the other, and eventually, end of it all, it will be the traveler who will gain the most, because he'll have more choices. He'll have choices at better pricing, and he'll certainly have much better options. So I'd like to be a bit more positive. Yes, we are in a bit of a uh, in a depressed, stormy environment at the moment, but I do believe we should pull out of it, and I'm hoping everything should come back to normal by at least 2021 or 2022.
IATA released in the last day or so some figures saying that the industry is heading towards an $84 billion net loss this year. How long is it going to be realistically for the industry to get its way out of this again?
I remember back in the 2008 and 9 financial crisis, IATA released a figure that said nearly 50% of world airlines will go bankrupt. But then those 50% of airlines that IATA spoke about were IATA members, and those were airlines that were still flying aircraft they bought back in the 1980s. What happened after that was nearly every airline out there got rid of their fuel guzzlers and adapted to much more efficient, reliable aircraft like the 737-800 NG, the A320, and so we saw new technology, which actually helped bridge the efficiency gap and the reliability um, tangent, and then made air travel not just safer but also brought the cost of ticket down, and it also lowered the effective time spent on maintenance, which effectively saved the airlines a tremendous amount of cost. So I see that revolution happening here as well. We're not sure in which paradigm it's going to be, but I'm hoping to think of it more in terms of a technology step up, because let's face it, the price of oil right now is just about a dollar and a half, $2 a barrel. And again, the unfortunate part is the cost of refining that oil is nearly $56 a barrel. So clearly, on the refining side, they need to build efficiencies and lower that cost of refining to make it more competitive. So we're dealing with a very interesting catch-22 situation here, but I do believe we'll pull out of it. And I think what will really play a critical role, Mark, is what I think what's even on your mind, which is technology. We spoke of SpaceX, we spoke of the Crew Dragon, we spoke of autonomous, we're speaking of big data, augmented reality. I think all those, fun to have, eye-catching technology elements will be brought into aviation and commercial airlines, the commercial airline business, and I think that's going to pave the way for cost competitiveness, as well as effective lowering of costs, and clearly try and help eradicate that lost backlog that airlines have at the moment.
Fantastic. Mark, that's a great place for us to leave it today. We've run out of time, unfortunately, but I'll definitely get you back. Before I leave today, though, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about what Martin Consulting has put together as a response to your positive attitude towards helping the airline industry get back on its feet again. You've put together a COVID-safe program. Can you tell us quickly about that in 60 seconds?
Martin Consulting has developed a COVID risk management and mitigation program that works directly on top of an airline SMS, so you really don't need to do much. You just need to adapt to a way of working that completely lowers your organization risk from a COVID impact. We're working directly with the IKEA document 10144, which paves the way for a working functional system. And we're pushing that out for airlines in the region, for operators, business jets, corporate aviation and helicopter companies. And I mean, the response has been outstanding so far, and we intend to do our bit to at least secure and make the skies a bit more safer, whilst protect lives and lower the impact from this pandemic. So we're hoping that it works out great, and that's pretty much where we are at the moment.
Yeah, fantastic. Mark, it's always great to talk to you about the aviation industry. You are an expert in that space, and I know every time I need to get information about what's going on, I come to you. You're my go-to man. I'm going to put the link in the show notes to your consulting site, so if anybody's listening to the show today and you need some expert aviation advice, Mark Martin is the man to go to. Mark, thank you for sharing us your insights to where the airline industry is right now and how we're going to get back on our feet. And as I agree with you, we must all remain positive that we're going to be flying safely around the world again shortly. Mark, thanks for your time today.
Mark, it's a pleasure to be with you on this podcast. Thanks so much for having me, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, sir.
My guest today has been Mr. Mark Martin from Martin Consulting in India, talking about all the things to do with airlines at the moment and how quickly we're going to be travelling around the world again and what that's possibly going to look like. Interesting to know the airlines are working hard behind the scenes to make sure that we can travel safely with as least disruption, but it goes without saying there's probably going to be a whole lot of new things for us to experience when we go flying again. Don't forget to listen to other episodes on the Global Business Podcast. I bring you interviews of business people all across the world who are talking about the real-time current situation in relation to their business. We can all learn from each other and share the knowledge about how we're coping with the new world order as we move forward, how some of our businesses are struggling, and getting some tips and strategies on how to look at things in a different way. Thank you for joining me. My name's Mark Philpott. I look forward to the next episode on the Global Business Podcast.